Well, they had the court order was
violated
Right.
that they couldn't speak after 5 o'clock.
Right.
Right,
That was the court order.
right. And they violated that,
Yes.
so,
Was Fred at the court?
no.
Because
Well,
I asked
say
Fred,
no.
I said, how could you have done that? I mean, you're a member of the bar.
Yeah,
You were complicit in violating a court order.
yeah,
You, instead of standing up to it, why?
yeah.
Why did you do that, Fred? How? And he said, because I experienced something very similar when I was in law school at University of Michigan, at Ann Arbor. And he said a radical was invited to speak, and a lot of groups would just, you can't do this, you can't allow this,
Yeah.
you can't. And in the end, they allowed him, and then it all went a whimper. Nothing happened. So he said that was my experience, and that's why I was afraid that if we didn't do it, we'd have more trouble than if we did it. But it still violated a court order.
It did because of the time,
Right. But that
time
was
frame.
done in consultation with Rudman, who was Attorney General then.
Rudman was the one
And
that asked for the
McConnell,
court
yeah,
order.
Yeah. Well, but
This is amazing.
But Rudman advised them that it's probably the better course of action to not buck them at that, don't stonewall at that stage. Let that stage pass, and maybe you'll avoid any, because, you know, they were concerned about Kent State. It was only a couple of days.
Day before.
Yeah,
It was the day before.
yeah, and they're tearing their hair out thinking there's gonna be bloodshed here.
So that is a very important point that I've not heard that.
Yeah, oh, they were,
But it was Rudman that asked for the court order.
right,
But then once he got it, he was actually concerned that it might.
yeah. He was very concerned.
So you were there.
I was there.
We were in the back of the gymnasium where we couldn't be seen, because we were undercover at the time. And we had audio tapes, but also there was a videotape taken. I have no idea, it would have got entered before the federal court. They may still have it in their archives, I don't know. But we haven't seen or heard from it since, but one of the guys that was with me he made copies of the originals and kept those in case the originals got lost back then, back in the 70s.
Wow.
And those are copies of
So
that.
you were in the gym. Were you in a room?
Upstairs, we're upstairs where I guess maybe the scoreboard was or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So if you come in the door,
Yeah.
the main door, you would have been right there, sort of right in the back, up there, because
On
they were on
one
the
end.
stage down. They were on the southeast end of the gym.
Yeah,
on
and
stage.
we were on the other side.
There were more students outside
Then inside.
Yeah.
than there were and inside, sitting on that floor. It was just, you couldn't move. It was
Yeah.
packed.
I think, did some leave? I listened to some of that, but a lot of it is screaming and yelling and hollering. But I think Wafers introduced the thing when it started. I think he's introduced the time delay, the fact that they're not here yet. You can leave because they won't be here until 6:30 and then come back. But don't everybody leave, because if everybody leaves, you know, we might not be able to get back in. So half of you stay here and half of you can.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I got there later, but I was able to get in, and I
Yeah.
was about maybe a third of the way back on the floor. At the time, were you a major?
Oh, no.
No.
Actually, I think I was.
We were all
a
spear
corporal.
carriers.
Corporal or a sergeant in the drug unit. It was what they called the CINB. Criminal Intelligence and Narcotics Bureau was formed in like 1967.
Were you in your 20s?
O'Leary. No, I was 30.
30.
And it's Dick Campbell
Yeah,
as.
and I'm 79 now. And he's 79 too. We came on the same day.
But I'm 6
Easter
weeks older
Sunday.
than he is,
Easter
wow.
Sunday, 1963.
Oh, yeah.
which he never lets me forget. It
Yeah,
was 6
yeah,
weeks
yeah.
between my birthday and his.
So were you halfway through your career as a Nate Trooper at that point, or were you in
No.
your first?
No, that
First
was,
third.
I went on in '63, so that was 7 years later.
Okay.
And I
And same
stayed-
with you, Ernie?
Well, we started the same.
This
day.
is Ernie Loomis,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
I met a long time ago, and but I still remember you, Dick.
Yeah.
I was a sergeant then also. And I was assigned as head of the governor's security detail. So I was with the governor and Rudman and Hall throughout all of that was going around, whirling around. So I wasn't there working like Dick was. I was there to make sure nothing happened to the governor while he was there.
So, in the morning, you remember, did you come to Concord, or did you?
I was living in Littleton at the time. And we traveled the whole state. There was 7 of us in the unit at the time. And we traveled the whole state for drug
Yeah.
investigations. But I was told to be at UNH, I think, like noontime. And we were given, or we had equipment, you know, recording equipment, for voice and for the video. And we got in early enough so we could set up with it. There was nobody else in the place. when
Were
we
you a
got there.
plain clothes?
Yeah, undercover. We're all long.
Uh,
3 of us, all 7 of us in the unit were there. But 3 of us took the responsibility of going upstairs and we're supposed to do the recording and so forth.
And you stayed right there until,
Until it was all over.
and how many were with you when you
Just
were?
2 others.
2 others, so the 3 of you. You didn't see each other that day then?
But
We didn't ever acknowledge. If I did see him, I wouldn't acknowledge him, ever, ever. I never spoke to him, I never,
in
unless
public,
we were, no.
Now, were you plain clothes too?
Yes.
Okay.
But when we were out and about,
And how, were you the same age, the same age then? So you were about 30?
yeah, we were 30,
yeah.
yeah.
And one of the things in those tapes, it said, don't trust anyone
Anybody
over
over
30.
30. In fact, you ought to kill him.
Kill your parents.
Yeah, kill your
And
parents.
don't trust anyone over 30.
Yeah.
But you really weren't that much older than a lot of the
No,
Yeah.
younger.
Well,
but-
in sense of maturity, we were
Yeah,
way
yeah.
older than the rest of them, because we had already,
Majority in politics.
we were both former soldiers. Incidentally, we served in Germany coterminously at the same time,
Yeah.
although we never crossed paths there.
Yeah.
I never knew him until the day we applied for the state police.
So for you in the morning, same
Yeah.
thing? Where were
Well-
you coming from?
We were coming from the Kentucky Derby. They had a governor's conference in Kentucky. We left the Kentucky Derby, we were traveling when Rudman called and said, you better get down here quick, you know, because there could be trouble there at the university. And so that's why we went down there, you know, so the governor could assess the situation and discuss it with Rudman. And because Rudman, you know, was, if he's listening now, he's gonna be nodding his head like this.
The general.
Yeah, he, you know, he would just barge ahead, you know, he didn't care about necessary, whether he had the authority to do things, you know. I remember one time he threatened the truckers, you know, that surrounded the State House, you know, there was a trucker strike going on, and they wanted to shut down everything that way. And he goes out and he tells them, look, if you don't move these trucks, I'm gonna call out the National Guard and we're gonna tow them all down and dump them in the river. And Suda's there saying, you don't have any authority. call out the National Guard. You're not the governor, you can't do that. Well, they don't know that.
They don't know that.
They don't know that, he said. So he was, so we went down, and the governor talked with Fred Hall and President McConnell. We had uniformed people down there too, but they were staging in Lee, although some people had said erroneously that they were staging in Newmarket, but that's not true. As far as I know, there was nobody down
All the
there.
state police were in Lee.
Yeah, the uniformed people.
Uniformed.
were-
A year or so before Walter Peterson died, I went to interview him
Yeah,
with Frisk Weatherby.
yeah.
And we have that tape here. So I have the Fred Hall tape, and I have the Walter Peterson tape. And now we're gonna have you guys, I mean, which really makes it, I was so surprised when I talked to you, because Paul O'Leary was the one that I had talked to about doing this. And then he died in the summer. So did you travel with them over to Durham?
Yeah, sure. Governor didn't go anyplace, I didn't go. If he went, I went. You know,
Yeah.
I was like
Yeah,
joined at the hip.
yeah,
Everybody was appropriately concerned, particularly in the light of what had happened at Kent State, you know. But that was the first thing he wanted to be certain of, is that the National Guard didn't have any live ammunition, which they didn't have. And quite frankly, in retrospect, I can't imagine what had been going through the mind of whoever was in charge of those National Guard troops in Kent State, but they never should have had live ammunition. There was no reason in God's green earth why they should have been issued live ammunition. They would have never done that here. But Ohio doesn't have a state police. They have a highway patrol, and their authority is limited. They're limited about what the governor in that state could order them to do. I think in recent years they've changed that drastically, because that was a failing, in my view, because the governor there in Kent State said the only real resource I can control is the National Guard for this purpose, you know. So bloodshed was certainly on everybody's mind that day, you know, the concern for it, you know.
When you were driving over from Concord to Durham,
Yeah.
was it just the two of you in the car? Or was there someone from the National Guard in the car?
No, there was nobody in it from the National Guard. I don't think there was anybody else with us.
Who was his chief of staff back then?
I would say it was probably Caroline Gross. Now, Rudman had been the chief of staff before he was appointed Attorney General.
Yeah.
So Stuart Lamprey had previously gone on to other things, so
So,
he was
well,
there.
you've got the governor.
Yeah,
You're driving over together.
yeah,
He's probably talking about the
Yeah.
events of the day before
yeah,
at Kent State.
yeah.
Were you aware that the Attorney General, Rudman, was on,
Yes,
he was
we-
on his way over there
Yeah,
as well?
We talked with him.
When you got onto the campus, where did you, what was your destination at that point? Was it the administration building, Thompson Hall, on campus where the president's office is?
We might have gone to his home, the
Okay.
residence.
Okay. And when you got there, was the Attorney General already there, or did he come after you?
No, he was there.
Did the governor stay all day?
No. No, I think Rudman said you probably ought to not be seen too much here, you know, because you may become a magnet, you know,
Yeah.
drawing. It is the governor, we'll go over and raise some hell with him, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But we went other places because he was always wanting to see the people that were gonna be in harm's way.
Did you go to Newmarket? Did you take him to
Yeah.
Newmarket
We went to Newmarket. And
to
we
see
went-
the National Guard?
Yeah, and we went to Lee to see the troopers. And there was quite a few, probably 50 or so.
Do you remember any discussion when you got to the president's house with Fred Hall, the Attorney General, talking about the court order?
Yeah, I remember at one point, Redmond was talking to one of Mark Weaver's cohorts. This guy asked Redmond, do you have any message that I need to take back to Mark Weaver's about this whole business about the curfew, you know, and everything like that? And Redmond says, just tell him he better get himself a good lawyer. If he's gonna fly in the face of this court order, just make sure he's got a good lawyer. And the guy was taken aback like this. But Mark Weaver's, as it turns out, was the only one that was convicted, you know, over this.
Was he
Even though-
convicted?
Yes, he
yeah.
was. He was convicted
Federal court.
in federal court, but it was
Overturned
overturned by the
later on at the end
Supreme
of the
Court.
year,
Oh,
1970. I got a copy of the case file.
He sent some of his henchmen down to Logan to pick up Hoffman, Rubin, and Dellinger.
Mhm.
Incidentally, those guys are all dead now too, you know.
Who was the marshal?
Dellinger was the last one.
Carlock.
So when you were there, you were in the gym. Were you expecting did you know about the court order?
All I knew was they were supposed to show up at 3:30 and speak from 3:30 to 6:30 or whatever it was. So that was the time frame, but nothing about any court order.
Okay, but that was your understanding. You were there to be ready.
Right, and we just stayed until they got there, which
Okay.
was.
And they didn't get there till about 7:30,
Yeah,
quarter of
something
8,
like that, yeah.
something like that.
And we stayed until they were all done,
Yeah.
and then we snuck out of there with the tapes.
Yeah. It started to rain a little bit as we were walking away from the gym, as we left that
Yeah.
night. Just a little bit, not a whole lot, but
That's always a good thing to temper large
Yeah,
crowds that
yeah.
can get out of hand.
Like the motorcycle race.
Little rain always
Rain.
helps things. We always prayed for rain.
yeah, well, it was a peaceful ending, even
Yeah.
though there was a lot of inciting of potential.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the language and
We had lots of peaceful endings in New Hampshire. We were keeping our heads here while all about us were losing ours all around the country. There was bloodshed. And, you know, we went through an incident at Dartmouth too, where they actually took over the building and chained the doors shut. And that was completely taken care of, and nobody got so much as a torn.
and when I asked Walter Peterson a few years back about what made him believe the position to take was to let them do this, he cited that incident.
Yeah.
Did you actually take him to Dartmouth? Were you
Yeah,
at that?
I
You were
was
there too? Well, he told the story of how he got there, went into that building,
Yeah,
and spent some hours
yeah,
with those students,
yeah.
and eventually, who had taken over the building, but eventually it ended very peacefully, and so he was using that experience as a basis for him to take the position he was taking.
Yeah.
And Fred Hall told me that he was using a similar situation
In
out in
Michigan,
Michigan when he was out there in law school. That was what gave him the basis for taking the position that he took, to not have this confrontation.
being able to put those things down without bloodshed, because no place else in the
Yeah.
country had been able to do that. You
Yeah.
know? It was tear gas, it was rubber
Well,
bullets.
if you just think of it, the day before, that was all over the news.
Yeah.
These students
Yeah.
on campus being shot and killed.
Yeah.
And so, just a coincidence that the very next day, 3 of the Chicago original 7 were going to be speaking here. It was really something. What do you remember as something that's very significant to you that happened, that you remember? Either on your way over with the governor, talking to him, the interaction of the president, McConnell, with the governor. You were in such a unique position here. I mean, you were involved with all the people that were the deciders
Yeah.
of this. I mean, they could have, the National Guard could have surrounded that gym and not have let them speak.
Yeah,
They could have stopped it. They could have done a number of things
well,
that
except.
they didn't do.
Well, yeah, exactly, but that could have led to something then extemporaneous that would be crazy, you know, that's when the crazies could take command, you know. All you'd have to do is have one in the back of the crowd, gin up a Molotov cocktail, set it on fire and throw it through a window of some building someplace, and that'd change the whole context, just
Yeah.
like that. From a relatively peaceful demonstration to one that's immediately out of control, so.
And don't forget, we had riots
Yeah.
before that. We had
Yeah.
riots at Hampton Beach,
Hampton
we had
Beach,
riots at the
motorcycle
motorcycle
races.
races in Laconia. In
Were
64,
you at Hampton
65.
Beach?
Yeah,
You too?
Yeah,
So I was,
you were there.
I'm a little bit younger than you, not a whole lot, but a little, but I remember those.
Yeah,
Those were huge, those were Labor Day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They were
Labor Day.
2 years in a row, and
no, it wasn't Labor Day at the motorcycle race, that was in
June.
June, Father's Day.
so there were riots at the motorcycle,
Yeah.
Oh,
in
yeah.
addition to the riots at
Yeah.
Hampton Beach.
Oh, yeah, we had fires, and he and I were covering a motor vehicle accident, which a woman from Connecticut was riding on the back of a motorcycle, and he was trying to run up through the heavy traffic between the lanes on Route 3 there, and her knee hit the bumper of a car that was turning out to see what was going on with the hold up down her, and it severed her leg, see? And we had to leave that and go, because then the problem was erupting in the Weirs then, exactly, so we had to leave that to go. The 2 of us were there together, taking care of that.
And were there National Guard at Laconia and in
Both.
Hampton, both places?
Yeah,
What was Hampton, what were those riots at Hampton Beach all about?
nothing,
The end of the summer.
end of the summer.
Yeah.
They put out flyers all over New England, said, come to Hampton Beach on Labor Day, we're gonna have a riot. And they did.
And it was 2 years in a row.
Well, yes, it was, the first year was not much, that was 64. And then 65 was after the motorcycle races,
King was the governor.
yeah.
Did anybody get hurt
Yeah.
at
Which-
Hampton Beach?
Oh, yes. Yes. Our guys got, Paul Doyen lost some of his teeth. He got a beer can full of sand. That was one of their favorite projectiles. They'd take beer can, fill it full of sand, and then throw it to us. That was a pretty significant missile, you know, coming out in the dark especially. So there was several of our guys were hurt. 64 was the first one, and 65 was the second one, both on Labor Day.
So you both would have been in your 20s then,
Yeah,
at that point.
yeah.
You have those two, and then you've got UNH. And there's been, oh, then
And
you have...
Dartmouth.
And Dartmouth, yeah, the Dartmouth one. And then you had Seabrook later.
Yeah,
But after Seabrook, we haven't had anything like those.
no.
Yeah.
Seabrook was the last big one.
Yeah.
1,445 we arrested.
1414.
1414.
Yeah.
Not that I remember.
Yeah, 1414.
26 straight hours to get all those people's fingerprinted and photographed.
Yeah, that was in the.
They were at the
late
Manchester
70s.
Armory, right?
A lot of armories.
Hundreds of them.
Yeah.
We opened a lot of armories to keep them jailed because they vowed to plug the criminal justice system by not accepting bail. You know, they wouldn't make their bail,
Yeah.
you know, which would put them out on their own recognizance to appear for court later on. Instead, they said, we're gonna stay here. And they figured they'd wear us down. But we opened armories and put civil defense cots that had been in storage since World War II, and where they popped them up, you know, and then they set them up, you know, and they stretched them taut. And they were getting into them, you could hear them rip all night long. Rip, crash! You know, they were crashing through them, you know. And, it was an interesting thing. I was the jail master at Concord Armory. I had 250 of them at the Concord Armory. We kept them there for 10 days.
At the state prison?
No, at the Concord Armory.
Oh, at the Armory.
We put them in the
okay.
armories.
Okay. If you go back to the beginning of the state police, in the 30s.
We weren't there in the
I
beginning.
know, but were these events, Laconia, the Weirs, Hampton Beach,
All on our watch.
Durham, and then Seabrook?
Yeah.
Was there anything like that before or after?
No.
So those,
The state police always had a detail that went to the motorcycle
Yeah.
races at Guilford?
Yeah, at the gunstock
The Gunstock. They always had
in the
that
beginning.
at the beginning when they had the races, but those
But
were,
that was just racers.
that was a hill climb back then, you know. But there was a big group of motorcyclists that showed up. In fact, I've got some film of that. It's pretty interesting.
so was Laconia, if Hampton Beach was
Labor Day.
64,
Yeah.
65,
Yeah,
and then
And-
the Weirs was what,
June of 65.
June of 65? Okay, so they were very close. Hampton Beach and the Weirs,
Yeah.
they were, so you had one 64, June of 65,
Labor Day of
the Weirs, and then
65.
Labor Day of 65 at Hampton Beach, and then,
We didn't have much time off that summer.
yeah.
And there was no overtime paid either.
Right.
What, but why? Why did they have that at Hampton? How did that?
It was Watts in California.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Detroit.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
There was a lot of unrest, craziness too. Craziness.
Well, the
So-
Vietnam War caused a lot of it, obviously. you know.
So let me focus on you for a little bit, Dick. You got in there, and eventually students started coming into the building.
Yeah.
And at some point, students were walking out of the building before they showed up. The Chicago 3 showed up.
Yeah.
You remember what that was all about? What?
It was well, I think Wafers addressed the crowd and said, look, they're not gonna be here until 6:30 or 7 o'clock. If some of you wanna leave and come back, and, but don't everybody go, because you might not be able to get back in,
Okay.
you know.
So some of the students then left, and then gradually it filled up.
Yeah. And when they came in, there was a huge cheer, you know, for the fact that they
And-
arrived.
They arrived.
Yeah.
And,
You were probably cheering.
Yeah. You were just sort of incognito there,
Yeah.
just dressed
We
like
were there hanging.
faculty members.
We didn't even go down on the floor at
Yeah.
all. I mean, we were just up there
Upstairs.
waiting to film.
Did you remember anything when the governor was driving over that they were going to prevent them from coming onto the campus?
No,
When they were coming from Logan?
no. There was no discussion about that. But what there was happening was there were uniformed troopers out on those roads there, and they were monitoring the flow of traffic. because we were concerned about emergency vehicles being able to come and go if something went wrong.
What do you mean by monitoring? Were they stopping cars?
Yeah, in some instances, because, you know, I told you about this other fellow, Walter Morris. He stopped that car.
That's the Chicago 3 were in.
The Chicago 3 were in. And when he found out who they were, he just said, go ahead, you know, because their instructions were, don't prevent anybody from coming in at that juncture. You know, just keep an eye on what it is. I think we were concerned that there might be outside so-called agitators coming
Have you
from
heard?
someplace else.
Have you heard Walter talk about that?
And have I talked with the guy that stopped him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I talked with him the other night about it.
Okay.
And he said, we just stopped them because they were a scruffy-looking bunch, you know, and they were coming over Route 4 because they had stopped at Newark's to have a lobster dinner before they came on campus.
Okay. You don't think that they were waiting for them to come because they wanted
No.
to see them?
No.
They were just doing all the cars?
Yeah, just looking them over, make sure there's no weapons coming in or anything that's obvious, you know. And,
Yeah.
but they were told not to stop them from coming in, I know that. Those were their instructions.
You know, having talked to Fred Hall and Walter Peterson and John McConnell, the president, that was about 15 years ago, but I got to talk to him a little bit about this before he died.
Yeah.
And we have our 50th reunion.
Yep, coming up.
Coming up. And be able to tell the whole story because we never knew that there were National Guard around. I mean, there was talk about it, that they were there, but no one ever had any proof that they...
Because you never
But they
actually
didn't show up.
Right,
Yeah.
because they didn't show up.
Yeah.
But it certainly turned out a lot different than
Other places.
other places.
Yeah, absolutely.
And exactly what you're saying, I mean, it's a tribute to those of you who were sort of the adults
Well,
at the time.
the cool heads, really, of
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
the administration, too.
Now, when we started, we were talking a little bit about the court order with Warren Rubin. The students felt that it was the Attorney General that got the court order, and the Attorney General didn't want these people to speak after 5 o'clock. And the students' position was that if you can have free speech at 5 o'clock, you can have free speech at 8 o'clock. But then he changed his mind.
I wouldn't call it changing his mind, but the notion then was it was a matter of tactics. Do you push that envelope hard there, or do you let it go? It's like football, you know? Do you let this guy through, or do you stop him here, you know? Block him here, or do you let him go through, let somebody else, you know, those kinds of things. It was a tactical thing.
So you think that he ideally would have liked it to be over before it's too late?
Before it
it
was
got
dark.
Before it was dark?
That was the whole idea.
Oh, okay.
We didn't want to be dealing with him in the dark,
Oh, okay.
so.
And hoping that maybe the students would go along with that, but once they didn't, there was then a different issue. His position evolved as things played out.
That's what I think, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Because,
And then with all the people that were there too, the crowd that was there, they were coming from all over New England. People were coming all afternoon. It was sort of like, kind of like Hampton Beach, where they
Sure.
said it was all over New England, inviting everybody to
I'm
come.
absolutely certain there were townies in that mix, in that crowd, and people from other places, you know, southern Maine, you know, didn't have anything else to do. Let's go down there and see what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, I know some that came from Maine, came down for it, and
But certainly, everybody that's served in the military knows that no plan ever survives the first firefight. No plan ever survives the first firefight. You've got to be able to be instantly ready to shift and lift, change upon whatever's happening right in front of you. See, because to just blindly enforce something like that, because that's the plan, when clearly things are evolving, which indicate that it's better to take this way than this way. So that's-
We saw that at the power plant.
Yeah. Oh, man, did you have to be flexible down there?
Yeah.
That was,
Yeah.
You know, I've known Walt Morse over the years, but I had no idea that he was the one. I had no idea.
actually, I didn't either until we were talking about it.
Yeah.
And he says, well, I stopped those guys. I said, you did? He says, yeah. So, interesting thing is, Rubin was hit by a car
Yes.
in Los Angeles. And someone died of a drug overdose.
Rubin became a Wall Street.
Yeah, yeah.
Something on Wall
Financier.
Street. He's an investment banker.
Yeah.
And Dellinger was like a minister. I think he was a
Dellinger,
minister.
He's the one that died, and he died in his old age.
Yeah.
But he was no
Older
youngster,
than-
and he was in his late 40s then.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. He was in Vermont. He was the last one. I really wanted to interview him, and I found someone who knew where he was, and it came really close, but then he died. So I never. But you guys have lived on, so you'll be the last ones to tell this story.
Yeah, we will.
You'll be the last ones that were actually there, and will my class will be talking about it a couple years, because that was our senior year, 4 years of 66 to 70.
You were the class president.
Yeah.
Mark
gave this-
Liefers was the president of the student body, right?
Yes. And see,
Which was a different function.
what's different is that before the student body, you had, each class had 4 officers. And the senior class president was what's called the interclass council president, which was like the student body
Right.
president. And so when I was there, it was sort of the transition. It was changing, but I was in fact the head of the interclass council
Yeah.
too, which was like what became after that the student body president. It actually started before, but there was sort of a transition, how to change from the interclass council to a student senate and a student body. The attitude then was kind of like you put someone in who people didn't expect to be.
Anti-establishment.
Yeah, not someone that had typically been the kind who had held those positions. It was sort of this irreverent, think about those 4 years. You had Martin Luther King, you had Bobby Kennedy, you had the first Earth Day, civil rights riots in 64 and 65 across the country, and then we had something like it here, but not, they weren't civil rights, but they were just rioting for riots, because there were so many riots on the news all the time.
So we can be like them.
Yeah, let's try that. So I spoke at our commencement, and I talked about a lot of what happened in sort of the middle perspective, saying that for the most part, those of us who were there from New Hampshire, we were from middle class families. We weren't radicals. We weren't the ones that wanted to burn buildings down, but we did disagree with some of the policy, and we couldn't vote. I couldn't cast my first vote until the fall of 1970, and I graduated in late spring of 1970, having been in college all those years and never having been able to vote, and really wanted to vote. But that was a transition. So
So the voting age was still 21.
Still 21. When Walter Peterson was running for governor in 1970 for re-election.
Re-election, yeah.
And most of the students really liked Walter Peterson, as did I.
Well placed, because he certainly was a lion. Great guy, I can tell you. I saw him at his very best and at the very best of times and the very worst of times, and I'm telling you, that guy's a rock. An absolute rock.
Well, you got to know him
Oh,
like not many other people got to know him. And I'll, you know, Walter Peterson, after he left as governor, like Hugh Gregg, like some of the governors, was an incredible person of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
I mean, he did
Oh, sure.
anything that someone would ask him, Walter would try to do. And my last moments with him, the family of Bob Stark, who was Secretary of State when Walter, they decided to do a portrait, and they asked for two people to be there. They wanted Walter Peterson and Lou D'Alessandro. And I called Walter to come to this event, and when I called him, he said, I will be there unless physically I can't do it. And he said, I went to the doctors and I have something on my lung, but they're not sure that it's really anything, and I'm going to be going in 2 days to Mary Hitchcock.
I took him that day to Mary Hitchcock.
So he told me that, and he said, call me the Monday before, this was going to be in like 2 or 3 weeks. Call me the Monday, the event's going to be on Wednesday, just to make sure that I'm okay. And so that Monday, I called him, and he said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but he said, I just can't do it. My days are numbered. When I went to the Hanover, I found out that I was not, and I was just so, and I don't know if I've ever done this to a person, but when he said that, because I had so much respect for the guy, and I said, Walter, I love you. Remember that. And he said, I love you too. And so those were my last words with him, and it was about 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So he lived for another, but he wasn't at that event, and I told the family that, you know, because he would go to any of those events, any of those.
Yeah. Well, I took him to Hanover that day, and he was in a wheelchair then. And so we got him loaded into the car and folded his wheelchair up and put it in the back and drove up there. And we went in, and all the people, the doctors, were like lined up on halls to shake his hand. You know. He was so hard to see a man that was so strong. Couldn't even stand up. I had to help him up. Then he was told that the cancer was everywhere. And they said, you don't have any time. And he didn't. It was hard to watch.
And people don't realize how the governors with the ones that are with them the most are a few people over the years like you, and they've you know, you get to really know them sort of when no one's watching, and we've been lucky with governors, but we've been lucky with people like you that have your own role to play and have done it, and you know, your picture's on in the paper, but things could have happened that could have made us like what happened in other states, but we haven't had it. And a lot of it has to do with the type of people that have been in your position as part of the state police. The period of time you were there.
It was the changing times.
It was a changing time.
And there's nobody there left now that remembers those times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even the commissioner
Yeah, they
came
call us.
later, he came in the 70s.
They call us all the time to find out what happened.
That's all.
I said, I have no idea about how to classify prisoners or anything like that. You need somebody here that knows that to do it. I don't care. You know, you tell him, the warden, I said, Governor, you got something to say to the warden, you got to say it directly. So I said, here you go, you know, and then he told him, you know, he says, Lieutenant Loomis is in charge of the prison until further notice. You obviously can't keep them inside.
What year was that? 70, 69?
Oh, it was in the 70s.
In the 70s.
Oh,
So
I have to go home and consult my
yeah, so
diary about that.
my first day in the legislature, I listened to Walter give his ex-augural address.
Yeah.
So I had one day with Walter as governor, and then the next day,
It was
Meldrum Thompson was sworn in. And it might have been that next day that you stopped me on 93, just before the toll booth. I was coming home from the legislature. Or it was a week later, but at that point you were back on the patrols then.
Yeah.
Once Walter left.
I had left before he left because, you know, I went to him, I said, Governor, I can't stay here because, you know, my peers are going off and leaving me. I'm kind of like in a cocoon over here, you know. I'm missing out on the professional development. You know, I haven't gone to any school since I've been here. You know, I've deeply enjoyed this, you know, everything. And I said, I got to do it. And he says, I understand. I don't want you to do it, but I understand, you know.
Okay.
So I had left about a year before his second tour was up because I had to get going, you know. I didn't want to. I'd end up being the world's oldest sergeant, you know. And, you know, it was so much, it was like night and day, you know, between him and Thompson, you know, because they were demonstrating at the Bridges house one time about something he'd done or failed to do, you know, and they were marching up and down on the sidewalk out there on the street, long ways from the house, you know, that long driveway that goes down there. So he calls headquarters and, you know, I'm the troop commander there, so I gotta go up and see the governor again. I said, okay, so I go. So when I got there, I pulled in the driveway and they separated, you know, across the driveway. They just stood there on it. And I rolled down the window and I said, you know, you can't block access, ingress or egress here at all. You understand that. If you do that, you've stepped over the line. You violated the law. Okay, yes sir, we understand that. So I went in and he says, Lieutenant, I want you to arrest those people out there. I said, Governor, what do you suggest I arrest them for? I said, as near as I know, none of them have committed a crime yet. He says, they can't be out there picketing up and down on that public sidewalk. I said, that's exactly where they can be. It's their right to do it, Governor, you know, and their right to address their grievances with you, you know, and all of that. It's a matter of the Constitution. I want you to do it, I want you to do it. I went back out and I told him, I said, don't do it. I said, I'm going to have a trooper here standing by, and I You can walk up and down all you want, but if some car starts to come out or people to go in, you make way. And they did. You know, there was no further than there was lots and lots and lots of that. You know. How come they haven't plowed my road up here on Route 25? What was that? C or D? Went by Mount Cube Farm. It wasn't going to be the first priority, you know. It was a light, very lightly traveled road in the middle of the night, you know. And those crews had a lot of ways to go, you know. And
So you got the whole road straightened out, repaved.
Oh, yeah.
During his tenure.
It was almost never anything that had anything to do with me. But he knew he could get me, you know, because we always answered the phone, you know.
Yeah.
You tell a DOT commissioner that. I said, Governor, I'll tell the DOT commissioner to call you. I said, I'm not going to tell him anything except that. He was a piece of work.
You guys want to get a little lunch on me?
Sure. On you especially.
On me. Over at the, they have a nice cafeteria.
The State House.
Just a little ways from here at the hospital. And they have 4 or 5 selections and...
I grew up on South Spring Street.
Oh.
So I spent a lot of time over here.
Frank Yanko owned
Yeah,
the Toyota
yeah, yeah.
place in Manchester. And I bought a Celica. It was $3,000, $3,500 for a brand new one I was going to use to drive back and forth. I was in graduate school. And I was coming back and either I didn't have the new plate or the new plate, the paper plate was off. It was something, a very small thing.
Might have been.
And, but I got pulled over. And all I remembered was you just took care of it very easily. And then, you know, you don't have to go to court or anything. And so I never saw you again for like 15 years. But I remembered the last name, Loomis.